Hey, it's Mike here. If you were ever to see my car, you would know I am not exactly Mr. Punctual about things like maintenance. I will forget about an oil change until that blinking light reminds me. So I guess Car Care to Go is designed for folks like me, and I suspect it's designed for a lot of the folks who listen to our show too. You make an appointment, they show up, pick up your ride, and bring it back a few hours later with the oil changed, the wipers replaced, and the seats tidied. They are accessible all over DC. Instead of sitting in a waiting room drinking bad coffee, why not sit at home and drink your own coffee while they do the work? Get your first synthetic oil change for just $20.23. Get it? That's 2023 with the code FIRST20. No catch. Any make or model. Sign up at carcaretogo.com. Today on CityCast DC, the city is pushing ahead with plans to build a controversial homeless shelter in a former George Washington University dorm. It's on a block with 2 hotels and Michelin-starred restaurants. Michael Bryce Sadler from the Washington Post is here to tell us how residents, advocates, and business owners in the area all feel about it. Today is Monday, July 10th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. All right, so if this shelter gets built as a shelter, what is unique about it?
Well, it's serving several populations, really, that health officials say haven't been adequately served in the city's existing homeless shelters, primarily adult families, because typically when adult families enter the homeless system, they're separated by gender, by sex, so men cannot stay with women.
What do you mean by adult families? Like married couples or like siblings?
Sure, yes,
or what?
With children older than 18 years old. It's basically what the city calls a congregate setting for a shelter. So many of the city shelters are congregate, meaning you have a bunch of beds in one room. So there's really no privacy. Families are split up based on their sex, and it's not an ideal situation if you have adult children or if you want to enter the shelter system with your partner of the opposite sex. The city doesn't have too many options for you. None at all, really, it's outside of special cases. So this shelter would provide something that hasn't existed before.
And it's also got fairly intense casework going on.
Right. So not only would this have 24-hour, medical staff on site, but the mission of the Aston really is to help service people who are unhoused, specifically who have acute medical conditions that require intensive service, medical service that you also can't really get at the congregate shelter site.
So what did it used to be?
There was a graduate student dorm for George Washington University, about half a mile off of campus. And eventually, George Washington University said, we don't need to operate this particular dormitory anymore. So they put out basically a request for applications on who wants to buy it, and DC jumped into the mix.
So one of the things about a dorm that makes it, particularly a graduate student dorm, that makes it different than a lot of facilities that get used as shelters is everyone gets their own room, and I think those rooms have their own bathroom.
Right, yes. Everyone gets a room. So under DC's plan for this facility, you would have a max of 180 beds at its capacity, about 2 people per room, and then, yes, each room would have its own bathroom, which is definitely unique.
So in this neighborhood, how do residents feel about the idea of a shelter coming in?
There's a few different camps here. I mean, everybody, including the ANC, Advisory Neighborhood Commission, that oversees this property and this community, there's agreement that it's important to house people who need homes. But how people feel about this particular location being chosen goes a multitude of ways. Some members of the community are really happy that this is happening, particularly in Ward 2, which has some affluent neighborhoods, including this one, and has a somewhat limited availability in terms of shelters compared to other areas of the city, because the primary shelter servicing Ward 2 is for women, adult women. So this would be in addition to what Ward 2 is contributing in terms of the overall homeless prevention ecosystem the city has. And some residents and advocates are really hyped about that and excited that the neighborhood is in essence being able to step up in this way. But others have very acute concerns about who's going to be living at the new Aston. And there are a lot of questions that have come up in community meetings about people with mental issues, kind of the really stereotypical caricature of a homeless person who might be irate or angry. There are a lot of people who asked about that and how it would impact the community that they know, and then also businesses on the block, including some Michelin star restaurants and some hotels that surround the Aston.
So in these community meetings, what kind of answers did they get when they asked those questions?
Well, the topic of mental health issues came up a lot, and the city's deputy mayor for Health and Human Services eventually said in response, there are a lot of people who live in all types of housing across the city who have mental health issues. It's such a broad strokes term. So they really tried to fight back on this notion that this was going to be some type of facility specifically for people with mental issues. It's not. But that was probably the biggest question that has come up about this project, is how is the city going to make sure people are supervised? How are they going to ensure safety around the facility? The city leaders kind of came back and said, we're going to have 24-hour security. No one's going to be allowed in. There will be security on every floor. But still, the questions remain about, well, how will the new residents of the Aston interface with the rest of the neighborhood, and what other resources are going to be there to make sure they can thrive?
Were they saying that the residents of this shelter, if they build it, were no more likely than the general public to have mental health issues, no more likely than a dorm full of graduate students?
In essence, yes. And again, the use of mental health issues here, I think, is being used differently by some than others. But the point was made, look, college students cause problems in neighborhoods too. And I think any of us who've been to college or lived in an area with college students can attest to that. So the hypocrisy, you could say, was pointed out there. There didn't seem to be as much concern or uproar about the college students who live there compared to the residents who may be in the future.
So this building, it's flanked by 2 hotels, and as you say, there's some Michelin-starred restaurants. How do those businesses feel about this?
One hotel owner came out with really acute concerns about how this would impact people who are staying in DC, tourists. There were a few business owners and even members of the ANC or others who represent the area who kind of spoke on behalf of some of the business owners to say these businesses, hotels, restaurants thrive on customer reviews, and if customers have an unsettling experience or something like that because of the Aston, what safeguards are going to be in place for these businesses? The answer was, it's presumptive to assume that there's going to be an issue, and that the city and the neighborhood needs to do everything it can to make sure whoever comes next at the Aston is welcome and can be successful and thrive.
It sounds to me like they're really poo-pooing anybody's concern that there will be issues that it would be any different than any other group of people living there.
I think there was a willingness to listen, and I think there continues to be. A lot of the upset around this project was a feeling that there wasn't the sufficient amount of community discussion that would often go about these projects. And the city has come back and said, look, we're just really excited about this. We want to make it happen. We want to close on the deal, because there were a lot of other interested parties in being able to take over this building. But the neighboring community, it's kind of like, all right, we'll slow down. We have a process for this, including a comment period, residents to be able to say what this means to them and get questions answered. So there's been an effort to do that. It has, maybe you could say, gone a little bit faster than normal. So that's something that I think people are getting over as well when they raise some of these concerns, is feeling like maybe it was sprung up on them. But I would not say there was a dismissiveness, at least in my view. I think maybe if you are living in that area and you have some of these concerns and you feel like your questions haven't been answered yet, then perhaps that's still how you feel.
The mayor has wanted shelters in all wards of the city. It may be a thing that a lot of neighbors are wary of, but it should be equally shared. Just because you're in a rich neighborhood doesn't mean you get to not have a shelter. But there is, I guess in this conversation even, there's sort of 2 stereotypes that are at the core of it. And one is this suggestion that homeless facilities lead to more crime in the immediate area. Is there evidence that that is true or not true?
That's a great question that I don't know the answer to, but I do think, as you note, the stereotype is certainly there. And a lot of people who testified had their own experiences of being harassed or knowing someone who has been harassed by someone who is perhaps living in a tent or homeless. And those experiences do stick with people. So I think a lot of times when those concerns come up, it's based on an anecdote or a personal experience. But one thing I heard repeatedly throughout the first ANC meeting about this was I think unhoused people, especially those with medical needs, deserve to have a facility of their own. And the but usually was followed by why here, why now, can this be delayed? Could this happen somewhere else? Could DC use the $27.5 million that they took to purchase this property and maybe buy smaller facilities elsewhere in the city? And the deputy mayor for health came back and said if they were going to start this process over, it would take probably several years, up to 5 years, to find something comparable to what they're able to take advantage of right now with the Aston.
Yeah, at a certain point, it's like a geometry problem, right?
Right, exactly. What's available? Does the city have money for? And they're able to actually use some ARPA, American Rescue Act plan dollars from the Biden administration for COVID relief. The city has some of those that they're able to use for this acquisition as well. So the timing is important.
Right. So take out your crystal ball for a second. One of the other big stories of this year is that the consensus that downtown DC, which Ward 2 is part of, is in trouble. People have not come back to work. A lot of small businesses are feeling the effects of that. A lot of neighborhoods, a lot of parts of downtown that once seemed pretty vibrant are kind of empty in ways that make you, at least make me feel like I don't like walking down an empty street. I like a street bustling with people. Did that issue, their stated desire to turn downtown DC around, did that factor into their thinking about where to put this?
No, not in a way that was expressed publicly. I think more than anything, rather than a focus on downtown's economy, which is crucial in the ways you listed out toward the city's finances and come back and all of those things, the conversation around this really focused on another thing that's very important in this region, which is housing and the dearth of affordable housing and this opportunity to supply more beds for people who need them. And that conversation, I think, in a lot of ways supersedes some of these concerns about how we're going to get our finances back in order when it comes to downtown, which is a much broader conversation and longer term conversation than how do we help people immediately when we have an opportunity to house them.
Right. Although related, because the more money you have in your coffers, the more ability you have to push levers.
Yeah, very true.
So again, it's this sort of, everybody wants to house the homeless. A lot of them just don't want to house them like next door. And we have a city of 69 square miles, most of them built up. Where would they create this facility if this sale doesn't go through?
Well, the city has made it pretty clear that you're not looking at a laundry list of immediately available strong options. It would be a very deliberate search, and it's quite likely that wherever they proposed it to be built next would encounter the same types of community questions and issues that arose with the Aston. This same dialogue came up with a lot of the other shelters that were created. It was not this seamless, every community is completely on board, where no resident or their neighborhood is part of a monolith, right? Everyone has their own thoughts and concerns and backgrounds and experiences, and you really see that diversity of thought play out at these community meetings.
So there is no specific backup plan?
No.
Got it. I'm curious, you've covered this stuff for a while. These kinds of controversies, issues, proposals, whatever you want to call them, happen all across the city. Do they feel different? Do they work differently when it is a richer neighborhood, when it's a more middle-class neighborhood, when it's a poorer neighborhood?
It's a good question. I think that a lot of the conversations are similar in terms of general questions about safety. How will this impact me? How will this impact my family, my children? How will we make sure that whoever is being proposed to arrive in this neighborhood is going to be well taken care of? And, it can be difficult at times to tell when those questions are rooted in complete earnestness of wanting to know the answer to help someone, but also, there's an element of selfishness there. And I don't think it's unwarranted if you live somewhere and have bought a home and you want to know and what's happening and how your neighborhood is changing and what the city's going to do to make sure it's successful. So I think that in Ward 2's case with this particular property, some of the conversations have gotten some attention because you have these complaints about, well, how might the Michelin star restaurants be impacted on this block? You're not going to see that in poorer sections of the city because they don't even have Michelin star restaurants, but They do have residents who've lived there and that's their community and they have an interest in how it's changing, just like anyone would be. So I think those same conversations play out maybe to a different scale or capacity, but the core concern is the same.
Right. And do you feel like in the meetings you have looked at the city officials who are there, there's typically like an array of officials from different departments and so on. Did they leave the people going to these meetings feeling like, all right, these guys, they get my concerns, they've got my back, I feel less worried about the things I walked in worrying about?
I think that remains to be seen as this process plays out a little more. My sense is there are still a lot of people who are just now learning about this and maybe didn't have a chance to make it to that first meeting that I wrote about, but are still sending in questions to their ANC. They're still sending in questions to the city. I know dozens of letters of support or questions have come into the ANC even after that first meeting. So it's just going to be an ongoing process. But the city has made it clear we are going to be along with you on this journey as you discuss this, because they do see their role in being able to answer some of these process-related questions. But I think one thing you mentioned, Michael, about how commonplace this conversation or debate is in all sectors of the city when there's a new housing project proposed, even when it's not a population such as the homeless being served, but even when you're talking about low and affordable housing, you see similar debates play out about the changing nature of the community and what supports are going to be in place for people who need them. It's important to read between the lines on what are those concerns rooted in and why. And it's just happened time and time again throughout the city's history. So this is not the first time and it won't be the last where you see these types of community debates.
So just real quick, what happens now?
My inclination, and I think a lot of the city officials that are leading the way on this project are expecting this to go through, are expecting this to not run into many major snags, and for the Department of Human Services and General Service that are leading this to be able to start on renovations right away in the month of August. The city's hoping this will open up to residents sometime in October or November, so they need to move really quickly.
Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Sure. Great to be on.
And before you go, here is some quick news. DC Councilmember Brianne Nadeau introduced emergency legislation to further investigate allegations against John Falchicchio. He is the former Muriel Bowser chief of staff who resigned abruptly in March after multiple women accused him of sexual misconduct. The legislation would require an independent outside counsel to re-examine the initial investigation, which was conducted by Bowser's own administration. The mayor has spoken out against the proposed bill. She says that her office's investigation was thorough. Also, green card holders are now able to work as DC police officers. Previously, only U.S. citizens could apply. MPD says the policy change aims to make the agency representative of the community it serves. However, the decision also comes at a time when the district police are struggling with a severe staffing shortage. And finally, thousands of Maryland correction workers will receive a total of $13 million in back pay resulting from an investigation into wage theft by the state government. The prison employees were stiffed on overtime for 3 years. After apologizing to the employees, Governor Wes Moore vowed to review other hourly wages across state government to uncover any other discrepancies. And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.